You never think you'll have to fight your neighbors to survive. Not in a place called Creekbend Manor. A place where the biggest argument is usually about, I don't know, the height of a privet hedge. But the moment you face real disaster, you realize what's essential. And what's just wallpaper, the berm. I didn't build it to make a statement. I built it to live. See, after the deluge of 21, when the Willow Creek behind our subdivision turned into a churning brown monster, it didn't just take half my back deck. It took a piece of my peace. That storm chewed through fences like they were cardboard, poured through garage doors, and left 3 feet of viscous sandy mud in half the basements on this street. We lost everything irreplaceable. Photos, heirlooms, the stuff that anchors you. I was lucky, barely. My foundation sat maybe 6 inches higher than the rest, and I'd scrambled, to pile up sandbags in time. But it was too close, man. Way too damn close. So that next spring, I spent 3 weekends doing penance, hauling soil and stacking retaining stone. I'm Marcus Thorne. Used to be a combat engineer, logistics officer. I know terrain, I know compaction. I know how to read water runoff patterns better than any guy who cuts the grass for a living. Certainly better than the HOA's contracted landscaper. I didn't ask permission. I wasn't required to. The earthwork, fully on my deeded land, set back 10 feet from the property line, compacted, sloped, and graded to dump water away from the houses and into the storm channels. I even planted native river grasses along the crest to lock it down. I'll admit it wasn't pretty. It looked like a 6-foot-high long earthen shoulder running across the back third of my yard, a raw scar in a sea of perfect fescue. But it was solid, stable, and when the next heavy rain hit, dry basement, dry lawn, and the first quiet night's sleep I'd had in years. I figured that was the end of it. Survival secured. But this is Creekbend Manor, a neighborhood run by the Architectural Purity Committee, a place where your house color had to be one of 8 approved shades of beige, where the mailbox posts couldn't deviate by more than an inch, and God forbid, a single dandelion showed its head before inspection day. First, it was the whispers over the fence. Looks like someone's building a fortress, Marcus. Is that a new mountain range, Frank? Hope it doesn't collapse and flood our yard next. Then came the knock. Saturday morning. I was barely halfway through my first coffee. Penelope Vance, the HOA's vice chair, a woman who wore her tailored tennis skirt like a uniform, strutted onto my porch with a clipboard, looking like she was inspecting troops. She didn't even say hello. This, she stated, gesturing toward the backyard with a tone that scraped like chalk, is not in compliance. We've had reports. It's inconsistent with community aesthetics. I just blinked. It's dirt, Penelope. Functional graded dirt on my private property. She pursed her lips, that perfectly sculpted look of superiority. It affects runoff patterns. Actually, I countered, keeping my voice low, it improves runoff. I used municipal elevation maps. The water moves faster into the swale and channels now instead of pooling by the creek. I have the reports. That, she clipped, clearly annoyed I hadn't folded. May be your opinion, but it is subject to community review. Penelope, the covenants don't cover storm berms. This isn't a retaining wall or a shed. It's landscape grade terrain adjustment, and I'm exempt under City Ordinance 402-3. She clicked her pen, a sharp sound in the morning silence. We will be issuing a formal notice. Mr. Thorne, you'll need to have it removed within 30 days. That's the moment the slow burn started, that specific flavor of anger that bubbles not from yelling, but from being dismissed. From knowing you're right, yet being stepped on by someone hiding behind the word policy. I did my research again, triple-checked, even called a buddy at the county hydro-engineering office. Everything I'd done was legal, permitted, and beneficial. The HOA had no jurisdiction. I sent my detailed rebuttal. 3 days later, I got the letter. Thick, white, the HOA emblem stamped in gold on the flap like they were royalty. Inside, a formal demand to remove the unauthorized land modification or face hundreds in fines per day. Unauthorized. They had no authority to regulate earthwork on private lots that didn't obstruct common areas. And they damn well knew it. But what really stung wasn't the fine. It was the realization that all my effort, my preparation, my trauma from the flood, none of it mattered to them. All they saw was a mound that didn't match their pristine Pinterest board vision of a backyard. I didn't care if they fined me. I'd go broke before I tore down that hill. I'd already lived through one disaster. I wasn't about to let petty bureaucracy set me up for another. The second letter was colder. It arrived less than a week later, printed on thicker stock, notarized, and phrased like it came straight from a law firm. Final compliance warning, it read in bold. Failure to remove the earthwork within 10 days would result in enforcement action under Article 9, Section D. Enforcement action. That phrase sat in my gut like a lump of lead. It meant they could come onto my land, hire a contractor to destroy the berm, and then bill me for the cost. I went to their monthly open meeting. The clubhouse, all faux rustic vaulted ceilings and chandeliers pretending to be wrought iron. Brent Callahan, the HOA president, who always looked seconds away from selling you a reverse mortgage, sat next to Penelope. They rattled through budgets, landscaping bids, and playground maintenance. Silence on my case. When they got to the open comment section, I stood up. My name is Marcus Thorne. I'm here to discuss the compliance letters regarding my storm berm. I'd like to formally request that the board cease any enforcement action. It was constructed within all municipal guidelines, improves drainage, and is on private property. Penelope cleared her throat, her voice wrapped in fake diplomacy. Mr. Thorne, the berm is not in harmony with the visual aesthetic of Creekbend Manor. It violates Article 3, Section A regarding structural alterations. Article 3, Section A, I cut in, refers to buildings and fixtures. Earthwork landscaping is specifically exempted under city code, unless it encroaches on easements, which this doesn't. Brent leaned forward, trying to sound reasonable. We've had complaints, Mr. Thorne. Residents voiced concerns about water diversion and property values. None of them have engineering credentials, I shot back, calm but firm. And none of them were there when the flood of 21 nearly ruined my home. That berm protects my property and possibly theirs. A murmur stirred in the crowd. An elderly man in the back spoke up. Didn't Marcus's house stop the water from reaching ours last time? Another voice chimed in. Yeah, that berm helped. Water ran off into the drains faster. Penelope held up her hand, that sharp sound of dismissal. Please, this is not a debate. And I'm making mine clear, I stated. If you move forward with enforcement, I will take legal action. I have documentation, soil surveys, and I'm prepared to take this to the Municipal Zoning Commission. Brent frowned. They might be used to pushing residents around over patio umbrellas, but this was different. This was safety. This was science. And now, it was personal. They closed the meeting without a decision, but 2 days later, I got the third letter. Short. 1 paragraph. Per board decision, enforcement action will proceed on May 3rd. Contractor services have been scheduled. May 3rd. I circled the date on my wall calendar in red ink. I called the city zoning office. They confirmed my berm was legal. I called Arlene Simmons, a land use attorney I knew. They can't demolish your property without due process, she said. But they'll try to claim it's not property, just landscaping. It's a gray area. You need an injunction before May 3rd. I filed the paperwork. I waited, but the HOA was faster. I came home on April 30th, and there it was, a wooden stake hammered into my backyard, orange ribbon fluttering, and a laminated sign from a contractor. Demolition scheduled May 3rd, authorized by Creekbend Manor HOA. They weren't bluffing. They were coming. The next day, Arlene helped me petition for an emergency hearing, a last-ditch effort. We sat across from the board in a back room of the clubhouse, fluorescent lights buzzing, 4 board members seated like a firing squad. Penelope was front and center, red lipstick perfect, not a hair out of place. I built that berm. I began, my voice steady. After the last flood nearly destroyed my home, it is not decorative. It is survival. Penelope sighed, leaning forward. Mr. Thorne, while we sympathize, the HOA has standards. Unapproved land alterations threaten property values and water runoff patterns. I slid my binder across the table. Hydrology reports, zoning ordinances, soil impact studies. All of it confirms the berm improves drainage. It does not violate city code. The HOA has the right to enforce neighborhood consistency, Brent muttered, flipping the binder open with a disinterested flick of his fingers. Your berm is an unsightly, unapproved elevation. Residents have complained, Penelope continued, brushing a speck of dust off her sleeve. The wind didn't let up that night. Every gust felt like a warning whispered through the rafters, the kind of wind that carries weight, not just air, but memory. By sunrise, the storm had intensified. It was now Hurricane Rowan Category 2, projected landfall in 36 hours, and Creekbend Manor was right in the cone. I stood in the center of my backyard at dawn, surveying the ruin. What was left was a wide, uneven dip, a gash across the land. Without that slope, water would pool fast and deep, racing straight for my foundation. and not just mine. What protected my house had also buffered the three below it. Penelope and Brent thought they'd struck a blow against aesthetic violations, but they'd knocked out a structural defense most of the street never even realized they depended on. I drove to the nearest supply yard. The line was already forming, trucks backed up, people loading plywood and batteries. I bought every stack of contractor-grade sandbags they had, 12 pallets. By noon I had help. Paul Becker, the retired postal worker from the HOA meeting, showed up first holding a pair of work gloves. "I remember what your berm did last time, Marcus. My basement stayed dry. I can shovel." Then came Sam and Marlene, the young couple from across the street. They'd watched the demolition. "What the HOA did was wrong," Marlene said, her face pale with worry. By 3 p.m., there were 8 of us, a flash mob of neighbors, stacking sandbags in a crescent around the back half of my property. We used old retaining blocks as anchors, laid down plastic sheeting, and even dug a narrow diversion trench toward the drainage easement. It wasn't the berm, but it was something. And more than that, it was proof. Proof that not everyone in this neighborhood had lost their damn minds. That night, the emergency alerts started hitting phones. Flash flood warnings, voluntary evacuations. People who'd spent the past year arguing about hedge trimming were now duct taping their garage doors and praying their homes would hold. I watched Penelope drive past in her silver SUV, her trunk full of bottled water and plywood. She didn't look at me. She knew. By sunrise the next day, the sky had changed. Dark, low, bruised like a storm brewing under the skin of the world. Wind speeds hit 40, then 50 miles per hour, and then the rain started. Not soft, not scattered, but angry. Sheets of it hammering the ground so fast the storm drains clogged in less than 10 minutes. By 3 p.m., the news stations confirmed Rowan had made landfall as a Category 3. Nobody had expected that. The storm drains overflowed. I watched as water surged from the street, poured down into backyard after backyard, following gravity. Always downhill, my trench held. My sandbags held. The water hit my property line, kissed the edge of the temporary barrier, and veered around away, just like I'd engineered the original berm to do. When the sun rose the next morning, the storm was gone. But so was half the neighborhood's composure. Brent's basement flooded, 3 feet of water and sewage backup. Penelope's patio destroyed, her fence gone, her foundation cracked. 5 houses in our quadrant had flood damage. 2 were red-tagged by the city, and mine was dry. I walked into the living room and stared out at the yard. The berm was gone. But the idea of it, the reason behind it, had saved me all over again. I sat down, soaked in sweat and rain, and something deeper. Resolve. They thought they'd won when they flattened that hill of dirt, but now they'd have to face the truth. The very earth had proven them wrong. I found Penelope in her backyard, standing ankle-deep in muddy water, staring at her cracked foundation. Her pristine rose garden was a soup of brown petals. Her white fence lay shattered across her lawn. I stopped at the edge of her property line. "How bad?" She exhaled slow. "We called a structural engineer. They think it shifted the slab, might be unlivable until repairs are done." I didn't speak, just let the weight of her words hang there. After a moment, she turned to face me. Her voice cracked. "I didn't think it would get this bad." "No one ever does," I replied. "That's why you prepare." Across the street, Brent was shoveling wet carpet out of his garage. His eyes met mine as I passed, but he didn't say a word. Regret has its own language. When the mayor's liaison arrived, a woman in a yellow hard hat, I handed her a file. "Flood prevention measures I had in place," I said. "Removed by HOA order. I want this documented." She flipped through the first few pages and let out a low whistle. "This might be the most thorough documentation I've seen all week." "I was military," I replied. "We keep receipts." The HOA board called for an emergency assembly. Over 70 residents showed up, triple the usual count. Diane opened the meeting with a strained smile. "We understand the storm was unprecedented," she said. Paul Becker stood up. "Unprecedented? You tore down the one thing that might have saved our side of the neighborhood." The room erupted. "You acted out of spite," Marlene shouted. "We're steamrolling into debt because of the damage." That's when I stood. Everyone quieted. I walked to the front and held up the file. "These," I said, "are the documents showing how I tried to protect my home. These are the letters where I was ignored. These are the expert opinions you threw out in favor of a lawn you liked better. If we keep letting power be exercised without wisdom, this will happen again." The next storm won't care about your fences or your mulch. I looked at the crowd. So now ask yourselves, should these people still be leading you? That silence was thunder. A week later, the petition landed, 61 signatures, enough to trigger a special election, a vote of no confidence. Brent and Penelope tried to fight it, arguing about procedure, but no one was listening anymore. Nature had made sure of that. The final dam broke when the insurance adjusters arrived. Their ruling, the berm's removal was being logged as external interference. The HOA's decision had cost people their payouts. Election night, the community hall was packed. The count took less than an hour. Effective immediately, Penelope Vance and Brent Callahan are removed from the HOA board. It wasn't triumph. It was relief. The next morning, I started rebuilding the berm. This time I wasn't alone. Paul showed up first. Then Sam and Marlene with their twins, helping fill sandbags. By noon, there were over a dozen of us. Young, old, veterans, newcomers. We reshaped the land, higher, wider, better. It wasn't just protection anymore. It was solidarity. Weeks later, the new HOA board, now made up of engineers and planners, met, and I sat with them. They renamed the committee the Resilience Review Board. My berm, now reinforced with interlocking stone, was featured in the neighborhood newsletter with the caption, "Preparedness in Action." The final piece was the hearing. I wasn't letting the illegal demolition slide. At the Municipal Enforcement Commission, in a room packed with neighbors and reporters, I laid out everything calmly: the flood, the engineering, the video of the bulldozer, the storm, the 5 flooded homes, my house untouched. Penelope's lawyer tried to argue visual uniformity, but when Jorge Morales, the city inspector, took the stand, he delivered the final, undeniable blow. The berm in question was sound, and its removal directly contributed to the uncontrolled flooding of several properties. If every homeowner had followed Mr. Thorne's example, my department might have had a very different report to file. Boom. The commission ruled the HOA had exceeded its authority. The demolition was unauthorized destruction of private property. The old board was fined, and their authority over storm defenses was immediately suspended.